You have a diesel genset, you've got an off-grid system, but you're thinking of running that genset on some other fuels. So what are the options? Let's find out. Vela here from Greenwood Solutions. We're talking biodiesel, hydrodiesel, coconut oil. Yep, alternatives to diesel fuel. So after watching the presentation, you'll understand what alternatives are out there and what are some of the pros and cons of the different approaches. Now, if you like what you see with these videos, hit that subscription button. Tell your mates, tell them to hit the subscription button as well. I got it out there eventually. Let's get stuck into it. Diesel generators are still used for various tasks around the world, and from a renewable energy perspective as backup on the grid and as the fossil fuel component with most off-grid systems. But what if you don't want to use diesel? Look, are there viable alternatives? And the answer to that question is a resounding yes, and that's what we're going to look at in this presentation. Firstly, let's look at diesel. In a book titled Diesel Engines for Land and Marine Work, Diesel himself said that in 1900, a small diesel engine was exhibited by the Otto company, which on suggestion of the French government was run on peanut oil and operated so well that very few people were aware of this fact. Now, the motor was built for ordinary oils and without any modification was run on vegetable oil, basically peanut oil. I have recently repeated these experiments on a large scale with full success and entire confirmation of the results formally obtained. Now that's what Diesel himself said. So what we're talking about here is Diesel designed his engines not to just run on a fossil fuel, but to actually run on a variety of vegetable oils depending on their viscosity, and we'll talk about that later. During World War II, the troops fighting the Pacific on both sides experienced issues with fuel supplies and were forced to look at diesel alternatives to run their machinery, which was considerable. One of the obvious options was coconut oil, and this fuel was employed successfully until diesel supplies were resumed. Now, let's fast forward 70 years, and a large number of people now are experimenting with other non-diesel fuel options. Coconut trees are found everywhere in the Pacific, tropical islands, and the dry white flesh known as copra from 6 to 8 coconuts produces 1 litre of oil, which is a pretty amazing. In the Marshall Islands, there's a company that has used 100% coconut oil in ships with 1,000 horsepower engines, and that's fairly substantial, all the way down to 5 horsepower generators. Now, the rising cost of oil, worries that oil will run out, and increasing concerns about the environmental impact of fossil fuels have all boosted attempts to find alternatives. Now, with all oils, viscosity is of concern, and the more viscous, in other words, sticky and gluey, the more potential issues using oils as a fuel, especially when it comes to the fuel line. With coconut oil, issues are as follows. Now, the problem is that coconut oil starts to solidify below 25 degrees C. But that's not a problem, obviously, on many tropical islands. So by carefully filtering the coconut oil of its excess moisture, in other words, removing it, the oil worked perfectly in many diesel engines. Now, coconut oil can be blended with diesel or used straight in an adapted engine or turned into biodiesel, which we've all heard of. Anyone who's been involved in sustainability has heard of biodiesel. Now, because of higher specific density and slightly lower energy content, specific fuel consumption using coconut oil is generally 8% higher. Now, some say that using more than 20% coconut oil in a motor is potentially detrimental to the engine, but this hasn't been proven, so it's more opinion than fact. Coconut oil is up to 30 times more viscous than regular diesel, so it requires some kind of heating element, and this applies to other vegetable oils, with the use of a preheater being essential if you're going to run the engine purely off a coconut vegetable oil situation. Most adaptation includes a start and stop on regular diesel. So just picture this: when the engine gets up to operating temperature, the fuel switches to coconut oil, and just before shutting down, switches back to diesel. Now, it's also possible to adapt the fuel system to start and stop on pure vegetable coconut oil as well, but obviously that would require a preheater. And these systems feature adapted injectors, dedicated fuel pumps, and extra filters. Now, what about biodiesel? And we've mentioned biodiesel before. Now, biodiesel is a standardized fuel that consists of vegetable oil methyl ester, and it's a product of vegetable oil that reacts with an alcohol, methanol, and a catalyst, sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide. So you're talking about something very alkaline. Now, this generates two products: glycerin for soap, yeehaw, I can get nice and clean, and biodiesel. Now, there's a standard for biodiesel, which is the ASTM-D6751 in the US and the EN14214 in the EU. Now, positive impacts on engines run on biodiesel include increased lubricity, I don't like saying that word, and a reduction of visible particles in the exhaust. But the problem at the moment is that biodiesel is quite expensive to make. So we're talking about cost-benefit analysis here. Now, there's another method, and there's another fuel. Instead of using waste oils, vegetable oils such as coconut oil, you can use ethanol that is produced by the fermentation of carbohydrates from various feedstocks, such as sugarcane is one, cassava or corn, wood and agricultural waste is another one, and anything that has a cellulose basis. The use of ethanol from a farming perspective really appeals to me. We're talking about this community spirit where farmers get together, they get all their agricultural waste, they have a community still, and then they have the ability to create their own fuel and run their farm machinery. Now, ethanol traditionally has less particulate matter than diesel. It is fairly clean to run. Obviously, it's not as environmentally sound as, say, electric vehicles, battery technology from an exhaust perspective, but certainly a lot better than a diesel engine, no matter how many filtration systems a diesel engine has. Hydrodiesel is very interesting. It's classed as an emulsified fuel, which are emulsions composed of water and diesel. Now, the main advantage to using these emulsified fuels instead of the fuel itself are many. We're talking about environmental and economic benefits. The addition of water to the diesel process actually decreases the combustion temperature, so greenhouse gas emissions and heating of the environment, and it lowers nitrogen oxide emissions. Now, emulsified fuels are very effective in simultaneously reducing nitrogen oxide and particulate matter emissions. Now, while internal combustion engines are still used, it is of paramount importance to explore the viability of using non-polluting fossil fuels, or at the very least, reducing our reliance on these products by mixing with other oils, creating biodiesel or ethanol-based products, or replacing completely with something like straight coconut oil, which I think is just a wonderful way to go, especially with the tropics. The issues with an internal combustion engine are many. No matter what fuel is used, particulate matter and pollution are of concern. But the ability for the farmer or similar to produce their own fuel has a certain attractiveness, not only from a sustainability point of view, but also from an economic one. Thanks for watching our presentation on diesel alternatives. I'm Veli from Greenwood. If you have any questions, any inquiries, any answers, feel free to drop us a line. And if you like us and you like the videos that we make and you want us to continue making them, hit that subscription button. See you next time.